Welcome to the New Heights radio show on education. My name is Barbara Bullen, and I'm filling in for Pamela Clark, the director of New Heights Educational Group and the radio show, as radio host for the New Heights Show on Education and the New Heights Educational Group. I hope you enjoy the show, and I'm asking our listeners to consider becoming a sponsor. This show is pre-recorded and will be on the subject of homeschooling. The first article is taken from hslda.org, post/district, give us your homeschool records, sign up for public school. HSLDA, Making Homeschooling Possible, by Thomas J. Schmidt, Esquire, March the 9th, 2022, Staff Attorney. District, give us your homeschool records, sign up for public school. I knew something was up when parents in Muhlenberg County, Kentucky, started calling to report receiving a strange letter from the local public school district. The message came from the Director of Pupil Personnel, and it demanded that families submit their homeschool records. In the letter, dated February the 24th, school officials stated that the district was conducting a homeschool review. Officials added that the purpose of this review was to ensure all Muhlenberg County students are enrolled and progressing in their various forms of education. All homeschool families in the county were told to include attendance records and student progress reports in their submission packets. The correspondence asserted that when Kentucky law referenced scholarship reports, it meant that school officials could request student growth charts or coursework completed. School officials generously provided a stamped envelope for families to submit all the documents. What the law says. While Kentucky law does require homeschool parents to maintain attendance and scholarship records, otherwise known as report cards, families are not required to turn over these records at the whim of local school officials. Under the Best Practices document, an agreement between Christian Home Educators of Kentucky, CHEK, and the Kentucky Directors of Pupil Personnel, these records should only be requested if there is evidence that an individual family is not educating their children, or if they fail to submit their notice within the first 2 weeks of the school year. All families who submit their notice within the first 2 weeks of the school year are presumed to be operating a bona fide school. After reviewing Muhlenberg County School District's letter, I wrote a response pointing out that their request for records from all homeschool families was contrary to Kentucky law and the Best Practices document. On behalf of our members, we declined to provide the requested information unless officials could show specific evidence that an individual family was not educating their children in accordance with Kentucky law. We expect school officials to drop their review of all homeschool records in Muhlenberg County. Interestingly, the message sent to all homeschool families in the county ended with an invitation to consider Muhlenberg County Public Schools for your child's education future. We would enjoy having you rejoin our school community as we would work together to help your child reach their goals and make Muhlenberg County a great place to call home. This puts an interesting twist on the parent motivation for the letter. The next article is from hslda.org. Post/cosmetology board reverses unfounded homeschool ban. Cosmetology board reverses unfounded school ban by Dave Dentel, web content manager March the 9th, 2022. A cosmetology school graduate who asked for special accommodations for dyslexia on her licensing test was instead nearly prevented from working in her chosen field because she was homeschooled. The young woman received her high school diploma in 2020 upon completing her parents' homeschool program in Oregon. On the strength of these academic credentials, she was accepted into cosmetology school in Nevada. After finishing the cosmetology program, the student applied to take Nevada's cosmetology licensing exam. She asked that test proctors accommodate her dyslexia, a request that apparently drew additional scrutiny of her academic records. Not only did officials at the Nevada State Board of Cosmetology ignore the student's special learning needs, but they also said that her homeschool diploma disqualified her from taking the licensing test, so she would need to obtain a GED. The grad's parents contacted HSLDA for help. The graduate's mom told us she had reached out to her state's Department of Education, said HSLDA staff attorney Amy Buchmeyer, and they recommended that she contact HSLDA. Both the cosmetology school and the Department of Education were very sympathetic, but they didn't know how to help. Attorney Buchmeyer began by getting more details from administrators at the cosmetology school. She learned that several other homeschool students who graduated from the academy had encountered no obstacles when applying to take the state licensing exam. Apparently, the difficulty arose for the Oregon graduate because she requested special accommodation. As part of that process, she was required to submit a copy of her homeschool diploma to the state cosmetology board. The family told us that the cosmetology board wanted documentation from the Oregon Department of Education vouching for the graduate's homeschool credentials. In response, Buchmeyer wrote to the board, explaining that they were making an impossible request based on a misunderstanding of education law. She stated, "The Oregon Department of Education does not provide diplomas or transcripts for homeschool students, just as they do not provide them for private school students. Instead, as administrators of their school, homeschool parents are responsible for certifying their students' completion of high school." Just a few weeks later, the board relented. The grad's mother reported that after weeks of receiving no response, the board reversed their decision as the law, facts, and supporting documentation made it clear that the diploma and transcripts were valid. The young woman took her test, earned her license, and now works as a cosmetologist. "We want to express our heartfelt gratitude," the graduate's mom wrote us. "It is organizations such as yours that give a critical voice and advocate for our rights as parents to homeschool. Thank you for giving my daughter the chance to move forward." The next article, again from hslda.org, posts / "As homeschooling grows in Romania, government cracks down." As homeschooling grows in Romania, government cracks down was written by Michael Donnelly, JD, LLM, Senior Counsel, Director of Global Outreach, March the 8th, 2022. Romanian Minister of Education, Sorin Șimpanei, issued a directive in February stating that homeschooling is not recognized in Romania and that parents who homeschool are considered to have abandoned the education system. Sources in Romania report that every day parents are being hounded by police and social services. Although homeschooling has never been explicitly recognized by law, many parents have enrolled their children in private schools based in other countries. This practice has been happening for over 10 years and was allowed by Romanian law. However, enrolling in internationally recognized school where English is the primary language of instruction is an expensive option that is not open to all Romanian parents. In response to the increased hostility to homeschooling, I sent this letter, which is listed on their website. It's a link to the President of Romania, affirming that home education has been recognized in all 50 U.S. states for decades and in many other countries around the world. In the letter, I called on the Romanian government to explicitly recognize homeschooling as an option for all parents and to cease going after parents who withdraw their children to homeschool them. As I noted in my message, homeschooling is a global movement that has demonstrated excellent academic, social, emotional, and civic outcomes for children and countries. I added, Romania has signed and ratified numerous international human rights agreements and declarations which protect the right of parents to educate their children at home. Sadly, the echoes of communalism resound, as the current government appears to be unwilling to support educational freedom. This happens at a time when the U.S. has sent armed forces to Romania as part of a larger reaction to the Russia-Ukrainian conflict. We must stand up for freedom and encourage our friends to do the same. Although every country has sovereign authority to choose to regulate education as it sees fit, Romania has signed numerous binding international treaties that recognize the rights of parents to choose an education that conforms to their religious, philosophical, and pedagogical convictions. The problem is that these treaties have been wrongly interpreted to conflate education with formal schooling. As part of our global advocacy, HSLDA is working hard to demystify homeschooling for countries where it is just getting started and to share that homeschooling is an effective way for children to learn. Please keep our Romanian homeschooling friends in your thoughts and prayers. Homeschooling is hard enough without the risk and stress of government mistreatment. Homeschooling is a right worth fighting for, and HSLDA is committed to making homeschooling possible. You can support our work by joining or donating today. The next article is taken from enidnews.com. /news/progress/ homeschool families take different paths to reach educational goals. Enid News and Eagle, Thursday, May the 12th, 2022. Love of learning. Homeschool families take different paths to reach educational goals, by Kelsey McKendrick, March the 6th, 2022. It's neat to see where their interests are and to tailor their learning towards that. Really, the goal in our homeschooling is to help them develop a love for learning, by Lori Duncan, homeschool mom. Enid, Oklahoma. When Mariah Smith discovered the Charlotte Mason method of homeschooling, all of the pieces fell into place. Smith and her husband made the decision to homeschool their now 9-year-old son 4 years ago to give him an environment in which he could flourish. But the first year, using a go-at-your-own-pace workbook and online curriculum was a train wreck. They pushed through, though, and were introduced to Charlotte Mason the next year. Smith knew this was the right method of homeschooling for the household, and she has been able to see her son progress in his education, become more empathetic over the last 3 years. It's really cool to see how his empathy has progressed over these last few years and how he can really dive into a story, Smith said, recalling how her son read a book a couple of weeks ago that brought tears to his eyes when one of the main characters died. That was just one of those moments. I don't see him having that moment in a public school setting, and that just reaffirmed that the decision to homeschool was the right one. Many different homeschool methods exist and include classical, Charlotte Mason, Montessori, unschooling, school at home, unit studies, and eclectic. Way of life learning. Smith was introduced to Charlotte Mason by Kayla Nichols, who has been homeschooling her 15, 13, and 10-year-olds for their entire lives because she wanted to approach their academics from a biblical standpoint at all times. She eventually landed on the Charlotte Mason method, a Christian learning model that utilizes short study periods for elementary students and longer periods for high schoolers, incorporating nature walks and journals, history portfolios, observation practice, memorization, and narration and reading. Charlotte Mason gets that education is important, but it's more than just the schooling, Nichols said. I always wanted my kids to be really well educated. I wanted them to read Homer and Plutarch, but I didn't want to just make trivia champions. So Charlotte Mason just showed how it can be the child's life, not just a checklist for them to brag about. Smith said her son's learning doesn't come just from books. It comes from everywhere, from cooking in the kitchen to learning yard work. Education is an atmosphere, she said. Laurie Duncan, who always has homeschooled her 8 children, ranging in ages from 24 to 7, said, whenever a newborn was added to the household, the homeschooling style had to change because everybody had to adapt and each kid had a different learning style. Duncan eventually landed on eclectic homeschooling, which typically is child-directed, resourceful, and non-curriculum based, with no built-in loyalties to a particular method, and treats curriculum options like a buffet instead of a set meal plan. I just pull different things at different times, Duncan said. It's neat to see where their interests are and to tailor their learning towards that. Really, the goal in our homeschooling is to help them develop a love for learning. Nichols added, there is no shame in struggling in any subject. If the kids do the work but don't understand the questions or get them wrong, they will go back to learn and fix it. They don't know what grade they have or even what grade they're in, Nichols said. They just know that they're learning, so there's no shame in what they don't know. Whenever kids do find something they're good at, Nichols said, they're able to run with it and go as far and as deep as they can with it, not afraid to learn. Classical Conversations in Enid is designed to teach required subjects while instilling a desire for learning in students and finding the fingerprints of God in all subjects. Students meet once a week as a community for grade-level tutoring, and for the rest of the week, the tutors are the parents, said Brian Tonnell, a Classical Conversations director. Although Tonnell's 2 home-school sons, taught by both Tonnell and his wife at different points, are now in their 20s, Tonnell still tutors students in the group because he believes that strongly in Classical Conversations, having graduated about 40 kids. The goal, Tonnell said, is to master the material being studied and to foster a love of learning. Several years after my eldest was out of college, he was at our house and had a big, fat architecture book with him. And I said, where did this come from? Tonnell said, he goes, I thought architecture is something interesting, so I thought I wanted to learn about it. I almost jumped up and down. He's not afraid to learn. Having options for homeschooling is critical, Tonnell said. What works for one family, such as meeting once a week like with Classical Conversations, may not work for another family who, for example, may travel a lot. Additionally, all children learn differently, said Savannah Holmes, who uses the Montessori method, a student-based approach utilizing free movement, large, unstructured time blocks, multi-grade classes, and interest-based and individualized learning plans to homeschool her 7-year-old daughter. That's enough reason why it's important for families to have a variety of homeschooling styles from which to choose, Holmes said. The Montessori method works best for her daughter who likes having more independence in her studies and being able to solve problems on her own. If you can really tune in to what your individual child needs and tailor your home environment to that, children really just absorb it all, she said. They're more likely to remember it. They're having fun.
Right now, you might be struggling through your classes or even failing them. You might be worried that you may not finish high school. There might have even been a thought that you may not be smart enough. Well, the New Heights Educational Group begs to differ. We not only think you are smart enough, but with our help, you will complete your high school diploma. The New Heights Educational Group strives to improve your academic success through its tutoring services. To learn more, please visit newheightseducation.org and contact us. New Heights Educational Group, educational resources to help reach your goals.
Hello, listeners. If you're enjoying the New Heights show on education and want to support or donate to our organization, please visit www.newheightseducation.org. And while you're there, check out our online store.
Welcome back to the New Heights Show on Education. My name is Barbara Bullen, and I'm the radio host for this show, filling in for Pamela Clark, Director of New Heights Educational Group and the radio show. This show is pre-recorded and will continue on the subject of homeschooling. Article taken from kmph.com, newsletter /Fresno Clovis Homeschool Community Rallies to Raise Thousands for Ukraine with Bake Sale. Fox 26 News. Fresno Clovis Homeschool Community Rallies to Raise Thousands for Ukraine with Bake Sale by Christina Lopez, Saturday, March the 5th, 2022. The San Joaquin Valley continues to show its support of Ukraine through community activism and grassroots organizing. On Saturday, at Dry Creek Park in Clovis, the Fresno Clovis homeschool families hosted a bake sale to support the country of Ukraine. In total, the event raised close to $5,000. Organizers said the money will go towards nonprofit organizations helping families and individuals through humanitarian efforts. The war, hitting particularly close to home for Dr. Maria A. Yukimenko, a mother whose family is currently in Ukraine, leaving their town of Chernihiv by car. It's not a vacation. They just jumped in the car. They drove under all the bombing and shelling and airstrikes. Usually it takes about 6 hours to get to the border. Right now it's a 4-day trip because so many cars are there and they go so slowly. There are so many posts there, said Dr. Yukimenko. She says her family has been driving for over 12 hours straight. Right now, the area they are traveling through, there is no active shooting. This is very important because personally for me, because my whole family is in Ukraine, they are all in Chernihiv, and that's one of the hot spots right now. There are bombs falling down, there are airstrikes, there is shelling, and it's very difficult, said Dr. Yukimenko, an associate professor at the Kremen School of Education and Human Development at Fresno State. During the pandemic, she made the decision to homeschool a child. What Putin is doing is not just highly illegal, but it's very dangerous. His strategy has been compared to the strategy of Hitler. We are at the beginning of World War III. We need to take his actions very seriously. Yukimenko immigrated to the United States in 2007 and spent 5 years in Connecticut, then traveled to Chicago. She moved in Fresno in 2015. I'm still teaching at this time, and it has been very hard this week. Personally, for me, I had a very difficult 10 days because of time difference. Ukraine is ahead, and things have been happening during daytime. I don't sleep at night. Dr. Yumenko wants those in the community to contact their local senators and request the government close the airspace above Ukraine and send additional military resources. She's grateful for the support those in her community. They are doing very important work in spreading the word. The next article is from CBS 19.tv. Article, Sports, Tyler Heat homeschooled athletes compete together across East Texas. Again, CBS 19, Tyler Heat, sports team consisting of homeschool athletes competing against school teams in East Texas. Tyler Heat, homeschooled athletes compete with Class 4A/3A competition in East Texas. Author Ashley Moore, KYTX, published 2:19 p.m. CST, March 2nd, 2022. Updated 2:39 p.m. CST, March 2nd, 2022. Tyler, Texas. As we continue to navigate through the pandemic, many parents have moved their kids to at-home learning, also known as homeschool. Did you know your homeschool student can still compete in sports at a high level against some of the biggest schools in East Texas? Our sports anchor, Ashley Moore, recently discovered Tyler Heat, a program doing just that, as she takes us through the journey of what it's like to be a homeschooled athlete. Home education athletic teams of Heat, as they say here in Tyler, is a program putting kids on the map that you otherwise might not have heard of. Carl Penny, board chairman of Tyler Heat, said the program was built based on demand. Tyler Heat is a homeschool sports, Penny said. As you might expect, homeschool doesn't have an organized place to play like public school does, so parents got together many years ago and said we want opportunities for our kids to play sports, and Heat was born. Heat doesn't have a home gym, so varsity basketball coach Jason Carlisle said that's where the community has come in to help. We have been blessed by Southside Baptist Church in Tyler, as well as Bullen Southern Baptist Church, Carlisle said. They have both offered their gym facilities to us for practices and or games when needed over the past several years, and we couldn't have done it without them doing that. And not only that, like we don't have a school bus or thing, so every parent is expected to get their kid to practices and to games. Let's insert the Barham family, who have 4 siblings, all a part of the Heat program. The family has 2 senior basketball players, a junior and a 6th grader who have been homeschooled all of their life. Their mom, Stacy Barham, said it's because of their way of life. Well, we began early on when my husband was based, Barham said. We as a family were based in England at Lakenheath. He's Air Force, and we weren't quite sure if we wanted to do British schools or how we wanted to work that, so we started homeschooling. That way we could pack up school books and come home during deployments and things like that. And it just worked so well for our family as a military family that here we are with 2 seniors about to graduate. They've been pre-K all the way through high school homeschooled. Did we mention Heat has a killer basketball team full of students learning in different homes across the region, coming together and actually competing with Class 3A and 4A schools here in Texas? It's taken a while to convince people that homeschoolers can compete and compete well and win, Barham said. And they have so. It's been a few years in the making, but we were super excited to join the program a couple of years ago. Her son, Andrew Barham, agrees. We've had quite a few people who haven't played us before. They definitely underestimate us, Andrew said. I was in the locker room one time, and I was changing, and some guy walked in and he was talking with his friend. They're from a different school, and they're like all Tyler Heats here. They suck. And someone's like, "Oh no, bro, you're about to lose," and we beat them by about 20 points. Homeschool students tend to get a bad reputation with common misconceptions like they have no social skills, are loners, and some even say they can't function in the real world. I do not like that people say that, Ellie Barham said. I think it's very common, and it kind of makes sense when people just assume that. But I really enjoy volleyball because people are like, "Oh, so you don't have friends or you don't do anything?" Like, "No, I do stuff." So it makes me feel like I'm a part of something. Even for the kids who do struggle socially, Heat is full of many students from similar educational backgrounds who all come together and are basically learning life together. The next article is taken from abcnews.go/health/why story/homeschooling surge continues schools reopening. ABC News. Homeschooling surge continues despite schools reopening. The coronavirus pandemic ushered in what may be the most rapid rise in homeschooling the U.S. has ever seen, by Caroline Thompson, Associated Press, April the 14th, 2022, 5:37 a.m. Buffalo, New York. The coronavirus pandemic ushered in what may be the most rapid rise in homeschooling the U.S. has ever seen. 2 years later, even after schools reopened and vaccines became widely available, many parents have chosen to continue directing their children's education themselves. Homeschooling numbers this year dipped from last year's all-time high, but are still significantly above pre-pandemic levels, according to data obtained and analyzed by the Associated Press. Families that may have turned to homeschooling as an alternative to hastily assembled remote learning plans have stuck with it. Reasons include health concerns, disagreement with school policies, and a desire to keep what has worked for their children. In 18 states that shared data through the current school year, the number of homeschooling students increased by 63% in the 2020 to 2021 school year, then fell by only 17% in the 2021 to 2022 school year. Around 3% of U.S. students were homeschooled before the pandemic-induced surge, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. The rising numbers have cut into public school enrollment in ways that affect future funding and renewed debates over how closely homeschooling should be regulated. What remains unknown is whether this year's small decrease signals a step towards pre-pandemic levels or a sign that homeschooling is becoming more mainstream. Linda McCarthy, a suburban Buffalo mother of two, says her children are never going back to traditional school. Unimpressed with the lessons offered remotely when schools abruptly closed their doors in spring 2020, she began homeschooling her then 5th and 7th grade children that fall. McCarthy, who had been working as a teacher's aide, said she knew she could do better herself. She said her children have thrived with lessons tailored to their interests, learning styles, and schedules. There's no more homework till the wee hours of the morning. No more tears because we couldn't get things done, McCarthy said. Once a relatively rare practice chosen most often for reasons related to instruction on religion, homeschooling grew rapidly in popularity following the turn of the century before leveled off at around 3.3%, or about 2 million students. In the years before the pandemic, according to the census, surveys have indicated factors including dissatisfaction with neighborhood schools, concerns about school environment, and the appeal of customizing an education. In the absence of federal guidelines, there is little uniformity in reporting requirements. Some states, including Connecticut and Nevada, require little or no information from parents, while New York, Massachusetts, and some others require parents to submit instruction plans and comply with assessment rules. The new surge in homeschooling numbers has led state legislators around the country to consider measures either to ease regulations on homeschool families or impose new ones. Debates have gone on for years. Proponents of more oversight point to the potential for undetected cases of child abuse and neglect, while others argue for less in the name of parental rights. All of the 28 state education departments that provided homeschooling data to the AP reported that homeschooling spiked in 2020 to 2021, when fears of infection kept many school buildings closed. Of the 18 states whose enrollment data included the current school year, all but one state said homeschooling declined from the previous year but remained well above pre-pandemic levels. The exception, South Dakota, recently changed the way it collects data. Minnesota, for example, reported that 27,801 students are being homeschooled now, compared to 30,955 during the last school year. Before the pandemic, homeschool figures were around 20,000 or less. Black families make up many of the homeschool converts. The proportion of black families homeschooling their children increased by 5 times, from 3.3% to 16.1% from spring 2020 to the fall, while the proportion about doubled across other groups according to U.S. Census surveys. Raleigh, North Carolina mother Lane Bradley said the school system's shortcomings became more evident to families like hers when remote learning began. I think a lot of black families realized that when we had to go to remote learning, they realized exactly what was being taught. And a lot of that doesn't involve us, said Bradley, who decided to homeschool her 7, 10, and 11-year-old children. My kids have a lot of questions about different things. I'm like, didn't you learn that in school? They're like, no. Bradley, who works in financial services, converted her dining room into classroom and rearranged her work schedule to take over her children's education, adding lessons on financial literacy, Black history, and Caribbean history important to her heritage. I can incorporate things that I feel like they should know, she said. Her husband, Vince, who retired from the Air Force last year, steps in at times. The couple also have a 14-month-old. They plan to continue homeschooling for as long as their children want it. Her social media posts about her experience have drawn so much interest that Bradley recently created an online community called Black Moms Do Homeschool to share resources and experiences. Boston University researcher Andrew Baker Hicks said data showed that while homeschool rates rose across the board during the last school year, the increase was greater in school districts that reverted to in-person learning, perhaps before some parents were ready to send their children back. He said the same health concerns that drove those increases are likely behind the continued elevated rates, despite additional upheaval in schools as parents and policymakers debate issues surrounding race and gender and which books should be in libraries. It's really hard to disentangle those two things because all of this is kind of happening at the same time, he said. But my guess would be that a large part of the decisions to exit from the system do have to do with COVID-related issues as opposed to political issues. Because those things come up frequently, and we've never seen an increase in homeschooling rates like this before. He said, parents also may be concerned about the quality of education delivered by schools that have had to rely heavily on substitute teachers amid pandemic caused staffing shortages. McCarthy, the mom from suburban Buffalo, said it was a combination of everything, with the pandemic compounding the misgivings she had already held about the public school system, including her philosophical differences over the need for vaccine and mask mandates and academic priorities. The pandemic, she said, was they saw the straw that broke the camel's back, but the camel's back was probably already broken. There are kids that don't know basic English structure, but they want to push other things on children, and it can be blatant, but it can be, and mostly is, very subtle, very, very subtle. McCarthy said, so we were ready to pull them and will never send them back to traditional school. It's just not a fit for us. It's just a whole new world that is a much better world for us, she said. The next article is from odyssey.com /KNX News /news /national /homeschooling still popular even as schools reopen. KNX News 97.1 FM. Homeschooling still popular even as schools reopen, by Lauren Barry, April 15, 2022, 11:44 a.m. Los Angeles, KNX. Many students across the country participated in school from home for the first time during the COVID-19 pandemic, when schools were closed to stop the viral spread. Now, more than 2 years into the pandemic, many haven't stopped, even if their local schools are open. According to data obtained and analyzed by the Associated Press, homeschooling numbers this year dipped from last year's all-time high, but are still significantly above pre-pandemic levels. Data from 18 states shared with Outlet showed that the number of homeschooling students increased by 63% in the 2020 to 2021 school year, then fell by 17% in the 2021 to 2022 school year. Many parents and teachers were dissatisfied with virtual learning plans, and the AP said the reasons some parents turned to homeschooling include health concerns and disagreement with school policies. For example, Minnesota reported that 27,801 students are being homeschooled now, compared to 30,955 during the last school year. Before the pandemic, homeschool figures were around 20,000. In suburban Buffalo, New York, Linda McCarthy said her 2 children are never going back to traditional school because they have thrived, since they now have lessons tailored to their interests, learning styles, and schedules. There's no more homework till the wee hours of the morning, no more tears because we couldn't get things done, McCarthy said. College Prep Academy in California told local outlet Action News Now that their homeschooling enrollment has increased since the pandemic began. One parent said she decided to enroll her daughter because virtual education impacted her ability to learn. She was ripped out of school for 6 months and pulled back in, and it created separation anxiety, which also caused her not to want to go to school. Within this whole year, they have lost so much learning and stability, and it's an up and down cycle, said the parent. The California Department of Education said homeschooling applications doubled from 2019 to 2021, according to Action News Now. Illinois, on the other hand, is one of 11 states that doesn't require homeschooling families to register. Last summer, a Chalkbeat report said that 10,000 students Chicago public schools thought to be missing or not returning to classrooms might have decided to go the homeschooling route. CPS continued to struggle with mask mandates and COVID-19 testing during the 2021-22 school year. Many black families have decided to go with homeschooling for their children. Homeschooling numbers for black families increased by 5 times, from 3.3% to 16.1% from spring 2020 to the fall. Andrea Thomas, a black mother, said she wanted her children to learn more about black history than she did while she was in school. wanted them to have a deeper understanding of history and the flaws within our history, she told Time. According to an NPR report last month, homeschooling in Virginia has increased by 40% since 2019, partly because many parents to realize that homeschooling is a possible lifestyle during the pandemic. This comes to the conclusion of the show. Thank you for listening. You can reach me by email, barbara.b@newheightseducation.org. Be sure to join the pre-recorded show every Wednesday by 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at radio.newheightseducation.org, where educational topics will be discussed. Have a great week.
We hope you enjoyed today's show. Don't forget to rate us and follow us on your podcast player. Check out our show page, radio.newheightseducation.org, for monthly announcements and other happenings.